The panel is Navigating Multipolarity in the Gulf, from Small States to Mediators and Middle Powers. And the panel will run until 12:05. Let me, with great pleasure, turn over the moderation duties to Omar Rahman.
We're starting now?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful, those who stayed in the room. Thank you very much for this panel. We only have an hour and 10 minutes, so I'm going to try to land the plane with as much precision as my friend and colleague Abderrahim did. Although we take umbrage with him encroaching on our topic a little bit in terms of multipolarity and the competition in the Gulf. But we're a forgiving group of people, so we forgive you. Actually, we've been done a great service by our keynote speaker and our host, Dr. Dhafar, who really covered the topic in her speech quite well. So I don't need to waste anybody's time, I think, by setting the stage. Really. But we do know that there is a changing geopolitical landscape, and we want to look at what that has meant for the region. And I think that changing landscape is both in the sense that the Gulf is no longer just the center of gravity in the region economically, but it's really has become the center of gravity in the region politically. And at the same time, we're seeing the shift between a unipolar world order to a more multipolar world order, and that has had I think a great effect on the region and its politics and how states are approaching their foreign policies. So we want to take it from there. I'm going to briefly introduce our distinguished group of panelists. There's obviously their longer bios in the packages you have in front of you, or just a click away on your phones. But we want to keep this short. So first, we're joined by Dr. Rory Miller, the professor of international politics at Georgetown University in Qatar. He's the co-director of the Small States Research Program and the director of energy studies. We have Dr. Ibtissam Al-Khatbi, who's the president and founder of the Emirates Policy Center. We have Dr. Hind Al-Ansari, who's a fellow at the Gulf International Forum here. And we have Bilal Saab, who is the head of U.S. Middle East Practice, Trends, Research, and Advisory, and an associate fellow at Chatham House and an adjunct professor here at Georgetown University. So let's start there. I'm going to start with Rory, actually, because, Rory, you are can give us, I think, a broad picture. You're an expert in small states. You run a program on that. Can you provide us just kind of a broader overview of the challenges facing small states and how those in the Gulf have overcome their smallness, to use the title of your most recent book, in both the unipolar moment that preceded the one that we've kind of are entering in, and in the context of multipolarity.
All right, thank you, Omar, and thank you for the invitation to be here. And also the opportunity to talk about small states vis-a-vis this really important global and regional issue. And the first thing I want to do is just set the sort of terms. States differ regardless of their size in terms of their strategic cultures and how they deal with the causes and the consequences of insecurity. But what I'm talking about here is small states that self-identify as small and face all the vulnerabilities, at least inherently, because of what they see to be their smallness. And the other is a relative term. We're small vis-a-vis our neighbors and those partners in regional organizations and security alliances. So that's what I'm talking about here, but particular to the Gulf and more broadly. And despite differences, you see a lot of commonalities. But for the sake of brevity, I just want to give you three. The first is, and these are the challenges really, they want to protect their autonomy and policymaking from outside interference. Very important. The second is distinguish their difference from their neighbors as a matter of national identity. Super important. And the third is building resilience from outside shocks. And they're the challenges you face, whether it's a unipolar or a multipolar or multi-complex region. And what my research works on and focuses on is how do small states overcome these challenges despite their smallness, or arguably because of their smallness. Now, in the unipolar world, and I only have a few minutes, what I would say is you have many traditional IR concepts that are relevant, balancing and bandwagoning, hedging to a certain extent. But what I would say is things have changed rapidly in the last 15 to 20 years. And in what I would rather call a multi-complex rather than a multipolar environment, what you're seeing is these smaller states are using increasingly using non-traditional forms and sources of power. You can call it compensatory power, if you like, virtual power, if you like. And this is something prevalent in the context of the multi-complex environment. And what does that mean, really, in terms of broadly speaking? Now, I'm looking at the Gulf, but I also look at countries like small states in Europe, in Asia, Singapore, Chile, in Latin America. What does it mean to use these non-traditional or compensatory sources of power? Well, one thing you're thinking about is rapid institution building. Being able to make decisions very quickly and rapidly that lead to some form of institution or other, formal or informal. And this is something you're seeing very importantly as a way to overcome the challenges that they face. The other is flexible maneuvering between partners, between allies, between competitors. One great example of that during the blockade was Qatar's flexible maneuvering between the United States and Turkey. Another is smart strategic positioning. I think this is probably the most important thing that very high-achieving, ambitious small states need to be able to do. Locate yourself between local and global actors in a way that doesn't offend anyone particularly, but maximizes the value of your relationship. And then I'd say another very important thing. It's very common to assume that because a lot of the Gulf states are wealthy, that they buy their narrative. Okay, and there's been quite a bit written about buying a narrative. But actually, these small states in the Gulf are selling a narrative. They're selling a narrative of being indispensable to their partners. And so what you're really seeing is these small states are overcoming their smallness by demonstrating their strategic value to partners by selling a narrative. And then the final one, and I'll come back to this maybe later if we have an opportunity, is fostering interdependence. The lessons of the last 10 years, and especially in an increasingly multi-complex environment, demonstrate one thing. You have to bind yourself to other actors in order to be secure. Because the surplus resources of small states, no matter how big, whether it's LNG or oil, are not big enough to be able to do this on your own. So that's what I would say.
Let me just follow up very briefly. I mean, you're kind of laying out a toolbox that these states have at their disposal in order to overcome their smallness. I mean, again, have you seen a shift from the past in terms of how those tools are employed or deployed compared to what we're seeing today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was not something that was happening significantly until, I would say, post-US invasion of Iraq in 2003. That's when all the bets were off, because before that, what you have is an actor that, despite some differences and tensions, was providing order, security, and stability. Post-2003, on a gradual level, you're starting to see disorder, instability, and a lack of security. And then you have to adapt, but your resources are not any greater. And so you have to start thinking innovatively, and how do you overcome these challenges to protect your identity, to stop outside interference in your policymaking, and to build resilience for these outside shocks that are going to come. So I'd say post-2003, then post-2011, and these are the key issues.
Very interesting. And I've just forgot to set the stage. Just like the previous panel, we're going to do 2 rounds of questions here, and then we'll open it up to a general Q&A. Dr. Ketbi, we heard our previous panelist talk about the kind of adaptability that Gulf states have had to make. The UAE appears to be seeking a greater balance in its relations with major powers like the US, China, and even Russia. Can you describe the point of view from Abu Dhabi on navigating a more multipolar world and the advantages and risks that this context poses to the UAE?
Yeah. Let me thank Dr. Dania for the invitation and this opportunity. But with just small comments that now there's a new form, not small state. They call it middle states, and nobody now is using small states. It's not about the size now, about the ability, okay, to move beyond your region. And this is, I think, applicable on the Gulf state. They are not anymore small, I mean, and their roles in the world. So it's not specifically UAE. Now, if we are talking all the Arab Gulf countries has a relationship with China, and it is, and Russia as well. And if you can call it, this is nation border strategy to diversify their partnership. Let me just go back a little bit and why these states they were always looking to the West, and why they shift and looking to the East. And this is started when I think after the nuclear deal with Iran, and when Obama moved, or what they call it, pivoting to Asia, the Gulf state also pivoted to Asia. They show a new world is there, and new opportunities, and the world is not only US and Europe and the West. And mainly it's economically. This is what happened, and not only this. And this is also, they join initiative like BRICS, and that summit between BRICS, GCC, and ASEAN, and Gulf Africa Summit. So the trajectory is diversifying partnership is expected to continue to Africa, to Asia, to Eurasia. These places but for UAE, so also they are positioning themselves that they are non-aligned, or I would say multi-aligned, okay? Centrist powers, so they are aiming to maintain a delicate balance amidst competing global interests. Now, the challenge is in maintaining this delicate balance between mainly China, Russia, and US through hedging, okay? And so they are, this effort to avoid any pressure on them from US or China or Russia. But I would say also, frankly, who exert pressure is US, always towards China. The Chinese never put pressure on them, on the Gulfs. Now, this multifaceted approach also made a rules for them. Dania mentioned the mediation. All the, mainly Qatar, UAE, and Saudi, they exert that roles of mediation, prisoners exchange in Ukraine, and Ukraine gave them this opportunity. The aids they are sending to Gaza, playing roles they didn't have it before. So this hedging gave them this, that they look to themselves, they can play more, because they are not anymore small state. The Qatar roles in mediation in Gaza, the Saudi and UAE mediation in Ukraine, you cannot say that they are any more small state. They are taking these roles, the Qatar between Taliban and US. So these roles, yes, beyond their sizes, but it is for middle power. So multipolarity is a good environment for these middle state.
Very interesting, and it's interesting to hear, we always hear the term pivot to Asia described in terms of US policy, but in terms of how the Gulf also responds in that sense, pivoting to Asia. And also, I mean, obviously the UAE is flexing its muscles, I think, beyond the region itself, and so in that way is described as, in this terms of a middle power. Dr. Ansari, let me turn to you. Because Qatar is also a small state that has visibly punched above its weight in the kind of diplomatic arena as a mediator. Can you describe to us Qatar's policy on mediation and how it's leveraged it, including in the current crisis over the past year, to become a diplomatic power on the world stage?
Thank you, Amar, and thank you for the organizers as well for having me here. So Qatar's role as a mediator is an essential part of its foreign policy. And in 2003, it enshrined its commitment to mediation in its constitution. But before discussing its track record and its role among the Palestinians and the Israelis in the current crisis, it's important to emphasize why a small state like Qatar would pursue such taxing role. You mentioned, Omar, it's punching above its weight. Sometimes it feels like the work it deals with is going beyond its capacity. And that is because it continuously aims to improve its stature as a reliable diplomatic player among powerful states, and at the same time improving its role as a strategic power player on a regional level. And in both cases, it wants to be seen as a legitimate source for conflict resolution, peacekeeping, and humanitarian assistance. At the same time, this role serves its national security interests and objectives, especially that it's surrounded by neighbors who have shown aggression towards Qatar in the past. Now, some of its key mediation and humanitarian assistance efforts include evacuating Afghan citizens in 2021 when the US pulled out. In 2008, it facilitated successful mediation efforts between the Lebanese government and Hezbollah after the 18-month-long crisis. It also facilitated negotiations between the Russians and the Ukrainians, where it successfully managed to release children that were held captive by both. And through them, Qatar was able to showcase neutrality, therefore earning the image of a reliable peace broker, which is an element it uses for its advantage when building crucial networks, when improving alliances, in addition to the power granted to it by its natural resources. However, Qatar's involvement in the negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians is a different case. And that is because the issue at hand is a highly polarized one, and because Hamas is deemed as a terrorist organization by many Western governments. Also, this is a role that involves balancing between diplomatic negotiations and humanitarian assistance. And Qatar's humanitarian assistance for the Palestinians has been used against it, has been weaponized against it by some Western leaders, accusing it of supporting Hamas, which negatively impacts its image and diplomatic relations. Now, first and foremost, Qatar's involvement with the Israelis and the Palestinians did not start after October 7th, but in the 1990s during the Oslo Accords negotiations, when Sheikh Hamad al-Thani took power and he changed the country's course on foreign policy and its approach to the West as well. Additionally, the reason why Hamas exists in Qatar in the first place is a result of the Americans requesting that Qatar hosts an office for them to do so. However, some Western politicians, journalists, news networks, scholars, you call it, like to pretend that never happened and further smear Qatar and distract from the fact that the Israelis lack any interest in peace negotiations. The repercussions of Qatar's role in ceasefire negotiations have been undeniably grave for its image, as well as US-Qatar relations in some regards, even within Qatar. And one might ask, well, why do it? Why has Qatar chosen to be proactively involved in such thorny issue that comes with a lot of challenges and sometimes feels like it goes beyond Qatar capabilities? Well, perhaps the Qatari government feels like in order to maintain its strategic alliance and reinforce it with the US, it has to showcase resilience, even in moments where the costs may outweigh the benefits, especially after Biden designated Qatar as a major non-NATO ally in 2021 due to their efforts in Afghanistan. And this is something the Qatari government celebrates. Also, while the blows that Qatar is facing from right-wing politicians and institutions may damage its standing in the world stage and its image in the short term, perhaps in the long term, this may serve Qatar's efforts in continuously accumulating soft power, therefore solidifying its commitment to its foreign policy objectives, including maintaining stability in the region.
Interesting. I mean, one of the trends, I've noticed, and we heard Congressman Ray Hall talk about the need for the United States to talk to everybody. I mean, what comes from that. We also heard Mr. Duss in the previous panel talk about the overuse of sanctions. And it's just, occurred to me that the U.S., there are so many parties in the region that the United States doesn't talk to. And it's come to rely on Qatar and other states in the region, but Qatar in particular, I think, in almost subcontracting parts of its foreign policy in terms of being able to negotiate with the Taliban, being able to negotiate with Hamas, being able to negotiate with Iran, with Russia, even Venezuela, which is in the U.S.'s own backyard. There's a role that Qatar is playing in terms of negotiating in that front. So it's become, it's very strange in that sense, but it's quite an interesting phenomenon. Bilal, let me turn to you. Obviously, American foreign policy is a large part of this story, both in how that's evolved and in shaping perceptions in the region of what the U.S.'s position is in the region, and then determining the actions of those states. So, I mean, how do you think U.S. foreign policy in the region has changed in recent years in the sense of it kind of informing the foreign policies of Gulf states and their orientation and outlook?
Is this on? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Let me start with a thank you. I'm sort of blinded by these lights. I can't see Dania, but Dania, wherever you are, thank you for the invitation. And then I want to issue what I think is an important caveat. I typically come to panels or media interviews or any kind of engagement in my field with a very cool head. I'm typically a pragmatic person, but today it's going to be hard to suppress my bias, some of my emotions, especially because of what's going on in Lebanon. I'm a Lebanese American, obviously. My town in southern Lebanon was completely leveled by the Israeli military. So my currency is my credibility, my objective analysis, but it's hard. Okay, that's all I can say. It's hard nowadays, and so if you detect any kind of bias, you'll know where it's coming from. And the bias also is with my disgust with the administration. Are we on the record? Is this on the record? Yes. My frustration with the administration. I mean, some of these players are personal friends of mine, obviously. This is nothing personal. This is all about responsibilities and policies. Probably the crushing majority in this room is frustrated with the administration's conduct in this conflict. And so that's also hard to suppress those kinds of emotions. And I'm not just disappointed, but I'm actually embarrassed by what we're doing. And so that ties very neatly to your question about U.S. foreign policy. Mm-hmm. No question, there's a lot of continuity in U.S. foreign policy with regard to the Middle East, and I think the previous panel did a very good job, even though I was late coming in. But I heard some snippets of it. Continuity in just identifying the interests. I mean, those interests haven't changed. We can sit here all day, talk about whether they should change, but they haven't changed. And they typically center on energy security and the security of Israel. There's a reason why President Biden, after saying all those very harsh words about Saudi Arabia, personally went to the kingdom to actually do a fist bump with the crown prince because he cares about energy security and nothing else. It's not really about him or the kingdom itself. Same with Israel. There's a reason why we're pursuing the kinds of illogical, irrational policies over the past year or so because we care so much about Israel's security, even though that care comes from a very, frankly, strange and incoherent analysis. As a matter of fact, if you really care about Israel's security that much, you would be pursuing things very differently. Well, let's just put that aside for a moment. These are the interests. They've passed the test of time. Whether we should incorporate new sets of interests into those, we can talk about that, but those have been the defining features, interests of U.S. foreign policy. What has changed is not those. What has changed is the approach. Until very recently, we basically were doing things, most things, by ourselves, relying on our supremacy, militarily speaking. I wish it had some diplomatic element to it, but not really. Lately, it's been much more of the military instrument that has driven, guided U.S. foreign policy. And that transition, which I think is sort of the major theme of this conference, is from supremacy to partnership with these countries that we supposedly care about in the region and that seem to have now gained some prestige, have affirmed themselves, asserted themselves, and that's the Gulf states. And so the big question is obviously that transition from supremacy to partnership. How the hell do you actually achieve that, right? And we're trying to fine-tune that. We're trying to figure out actually how do we do that. And it's been a very lopsided affair, obviously. And not all of these countries are the same. Okay, let's be very honest about that. We seem to have devoted a bit more attention lately to the Saudis. I guess for understandable reasons. They're the biggest partner that we have in the Arab world. We can debate until the cows come home whether that should be the case in terms of the attention and the investment that we're putting into that basket. But I mean, President Biden has sort of ushered his own strategy, and whether that's going to sort of survive in the next administration, whoever it's going to be, I think it will. But his transformational plan for the region, if you want to describe it as a strategy, is, and the previous panel talked about it, is this whole mega deal, obviously, Saudi, US, Israel. I think you all know the legs of it. I'm not going to delve deeply into that, but that is sort of the biggest now ticket item of US foreign policy towards the Middle East. Should it be? We can debate that as well. I've basically haven't missed a single outlet where I haven't talked about the US-Saudi defense deal, for at least from a defense point of view. So I have my own reservations, concerns, requirements in terms of how that could actually succeed and how it could have the positive implications for that transition that I'm talking about. Let's just say it's going to take more than a week. Even if they sign literally tomorrow, I don't think it will have the implications that they think are going to be so significant in their attempt to transition from supremacy to partnership. It's certainly the right way to think about it in terms of no longer doing things on our own, no longer relying on our own resources exclusively to handle the Middle East. But then it comes down to actually how do you execute and how do you bring about a coalition of like-minded countries who at least agree on the most important things. They're never going to agree on everything, that's for sure, but at least on the most important drivers of stability in the region. And my concern is that in that transformational plan, I think we're putting everything in one basket, and I think it's leaving out many other issues that certainly have drastic effects on regional security that go way beyond normalization between the Saudis and the Israelis, or even the expansion of the Abraham Accords. There's a lot of detail that obviously I missed out, but I was given 4 minutes, so there you go.
I just want to follow up. And first of all, as a Lebanese and Palestinian American, I share your dismay with U.S. foreign policy in the region. But it seemed like previous administrations were saying that the Gulf needs to take more agency over its own affairs, and then a response to that may be hedging, as Dr. Ketbi said, hedging relationships and pivoting towards Asia a bit. But then, as a response to that, the Biden administration sees that pivot towards Asia and jumps back into that void and says we need a closer relationship with Saudi. We need to bring them closer and maybe offer some type of, maybe can you respond a little bit to that tension there and kind of looking ahead to maybe a future administration, how it might respond to that?
Yeah, sure. And that's the right tension to describe. So let me just give you an example. In any strategic document that you come across, be it in the Pentagon, the White House, I don't think the State Department has as clear documents as what I am going to talk about, but there are many countries in the world or issue areas where we actually have codified and formal strategies. We have a strategy for Africa. We have a strategy for Latin America. We have a strategy for irregular warfare, artificial intelligence, cyber, and yet we don't have one for the Middle East. And now the immediate reaction is, of course, because the Middle East is so complicated. Well, damn right. I mean, that's precisely why you need a strategy for it. When was the last time we actually had clear thinking and an actual strategy for the Middle East? I mean, last time I checked, closest to that was the Carter Doctrine. Okay, that was a while ago. And if anybody in here has, repeated the following, is that the Middle East has changed pretty darn well since then. And so we need some kind of an organizing principle, some kind of a doctrine for the Middle East that goes way beyond just normalization. To your point, which I think is a good one, I think hedging, first of all, is too strong a word. I don't think I could be wrong, but I think it's not exactly hedging that the Gulf states are doing. It's much more them actually pursuing their interests, as they should, very rationally, just like any other actor in the world. And they have a lot of things in common with the Chinese and the Russians. And if that displeases Washington, then so be it. It's not really about hedging. This is not really centered on the Americans to piss them off. It's just more about them recognizing that they actually have opportunities elsewhere. And I think we've pretty much digested that concept. I mean, it doesn't please us, it annoys us, but I think we pretty much cannot stop that train that already has departed the station. The reason why I say we haven't actually had a document or some kind of clear thinking on the Middle East in terms of strategy is because I would like to see in that piece of paper actually how collectively in the United States government we now view the Middle East's strategic significance in this very changing world that we live in. Okay, back in the day, it was pretty clear, right? And we clearly relied on oil exports. No longer the case now. And so how we adjust that thinking and how it actually translates into strategy is incredibly important. Nobody's doing that kind of thinking in the United States government. I don't know if it's going to happen in the next administration, but for you to pay attention, more close attention to the Indo-Pacific and Europe, I get it. I mean, that's perfectly fine. I mean, China and Asia, a huge market. China is a pacing threat. You know all the words that we put in those documents, near peer competitor. That's no problem at all. But you have to understand better how do you actually integrate the Middle East into this equation, because the Middle East is not just a region, it is actually a huge part of an integrated world that has legs, it's kind of like an octopus. And so not trying to integrate the Middle East into your broader strategy it has been a huge mistake, right? And nobody's done that, frankly, that clear thinking so far. I think that's been a huge mistake on the part of not just this administration and the one before it and the one before it. The pivot is perfectly fine from a logical point of view, but how do you integrate this region, which remains strategically vital? I mean, heck, just a few weeks ago, we signed $1 billion contract with the UAE on artificial intelligence. You're going to see much more of those things. That tells you that the Middle East still matters. That tells you the Middle East also is going to play a huge role in energy sufficiency and energy sustainability and all that things. There's a lot there beyond security in the Middle East. Nobody's really has integrated that into the administrations and the U.S. government's thinking about U.S. foreign policy overall.
Thank you. I asked you an open-ended follow-up question, so that's my fault. But Dr. Bassem, let me turn back to you. I mentioned earlier that I thought the Gulf is not just the economic center of gravity in the region, but a political one. So, I mean, what type of power and influence has that given the GCC in general, the UAE in particular, and what type of responsibility, I think, stems from that power and influence for maintaining regional stability? And how do you think maybe the UAE has performed in that regard?
No, I just want to comment with Bilal, because we were in 2016, if you remember, when you were with the Atlantic Council, we had that workshop on U.S. changing assessment of the Gulf and pivoting to Asia, and after the nuclear deal, that no more this area is important, or after that deal with Iran, this area will be an oasis of peace, which it did not happen. It's, if I will describe it, it's misperception of the region. And this continue from administration to administration to administration. And it's not lack of strategy, there is no strategy. There is always no strategy. So, and this is what makes the Gulf confused. With each president coming, you don't know what do they want. Now, if you are good with the Republican, the Democrats coming, take it. This is against them. If you are good with the Democrat, this is again, and this is what makes Gulfists also confused, looking to themselves, looking to their interest, trying. And with this region was plagued with wars and conflicts and unstable, so the Gulf is also looking to themselves, okay, and they want to be, not to be part of that. Yes, it is center of gravity. Now, if you look between all of this, look to Sudan, look wherever, North Africa, Syria, Lebanon, wherever we are. And this is also has not been recognized, or there is recognition for that. The latest visit of Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed came after what? A lot of pressure has been put on UAE. A lot of pressure put on Saudi and with their relation with China. Okay? And what for? You pivoted. You left the Middle East. And when you left from the door, the Chinese came from the window. So why you are blaming the Gulfists? Now, for sure, look who is taking a role in Gaza. Qatar, Saudi, Emirat. 3 Gulf countries taking role. Okay, not on behalf, by the way, not on behalf of any body. This is, all of them believe that a stable region is good for everybody. The connectivity which my brother Muhammad always says, Muhammad Baharoun, will not work with a wars and unstable region. Yes, you will find us now all over the world. You'll find us in Africa. It's not stretching the muscles. If there is vacuum, you will go there. When there was a vacuum in the region because after Arab Spring, Turkey and Iran stretched their muscles in the region, right or not? So, and always, if the Gulf goes here and there, blamed, why you are there? Come on, why it's halal for you, haram for us? Okay, you are not there for the charity also. It's interest for everybody. So why you are in Africa? Okay, what do US doing? What do the French doing? What do others doing there? They're not coming for the sake of the African. Also, it's about interest, but how you approach that, this is the question. You approach it through wars, through conflicts, or you approach it with initiative like climate change, like maritime security, like energy security, food security. This is how you approach, and this is the difference of approach. Of course, what's going in Gaza affecting the Gulf. Because this region, if it's non-stable at all, it means all of this will spill over to us. So that's why we are trying to put the fire wherever it is. That's why any conflict, any instability in a region, affecting us. Yes, we are in a Gulf oasis of prosperity, but we are not away. If your neighbor having a fire, this fire definitely will come to your region. But I'm always upset with when they are asking, what are you doing in Africa? Why you are going to your region? Come on. Why this question only to the Gulfists? So we have the right. As I said, now we are middle power in terms of influence, in terms of practicing our roles in different ways. And this is, I think, an added value to the region. It doesn't take from the region anything. Because of the Arab Spring, all these regional powers, they've been weakened. No? Syria, Baghdad, Egypt. So there is a vacuum. These countries found a way to fill that vacuum in a good way, not in a bad way.
Yeah, I would love to follow up on that. I'm a little mindful of time, so I want to, again, meet my commitment to land the ship precisely as Abderrahim did. Let me turn to Dr. Ansari. In the past year, we've seen Qatar play a significant diplomatic role, which we've spoken about. In the current crisis, and in so doing, even deepen its relationship with the Biden administration further in terms of the strategic relationship. There's obviously an election coming in the next couple weeks. Do you think that the outcome of that election could affect the U.S.-Qatar relationship, even given the kind of centrality that Qatar has come to play in U.S. foreign policy, which we spoke about previously?
Yeah, before I talk about the current elections, I just want to reiterate the Qatar's record in facilitating diplomatic negotiations and conflict resolutions, because it has proven to the Americans that it plays an indispensable role in fulfilling U.S. policies, foreign policies, whether it's related to negotiations with Hamas, facilitating U.S. interests in Afghanistan, evacuating over 130,000 Afghanis, pledging $75 million to support them, even previously in Sudan, when there was a conflict between Omar al-Bashir's government and non-governmental factions. So the U.S. understands in its value in this sense. But one of the things that I sometimes find to be a little bit bewildering is seeing two camps in the U.S. government, where it applauds Qatar for its role in mediation and also for hosting the Taliban, as you mentioned, Omar, earlier in 2013, but then having this other camp reprimanding Qatar, pretending that the Americans themselves did not request that Qatar does that, using against it. So there is a push and pull every now and then in this regard, which is a quite interesting dynamic. But Qatar understands that playing a role, whether major or minor, in U.S. foreign policy interests comes with a high price, but it still prioritizes its relationship because of its own national and regional security interests. Now, in terms of the elections, if Kamala Harris wins, we're more likely to see a continuation of the same patterns established under Biden. And Qatar's designation as a major non-NATO ally will likely remain an important designation for Harris, as well as the strategic depth developed under Biden, whether related to counterterrorism, mediation, and a lot more. But Trump and his administration, however, is a different story. There will be a lot more challenges that Qatar may deal with, especially when considering Trump's administration's history with the GCC states, namely Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, and of course the region overall. Qatar may have to recalibrate some aspects of its foreign policy because initially they do not overlap with the Trump's policies the way that the Saudi Arabia and UAE does. For example, both countries align with Trump's ambitions towards Iran, where he aims to contain Iran's influence on a regional level. His withdrawal from the Iran deal, the nuclear deal, and the sanctions imposed on Iran later on complement the UAE and Saudi Arabia's approach, and less so with Qatar, because it does not share the same policies as their neighbors do. And also it has developed more of a practical relationship with Iran, and they actually share a gas field known as the North Field in the Persian Gulf. Also, given that Qatar provides financial humanitarian assistance for the Palestinians through Hamas, this may create some friction between the country and Trump because of Trump's hardline pro-Israel stance. And regardless, Qatar has shown durability and adaptability in similar situations in the past. So it will have to take certain measures in order to mitigate some of the challenges that may arise as a result of their unique foreign policy approach. And we've seen their ability to persevere under immense political and economic pressure in 2017 when the blockade was imposed on it by neighboring countries. And within the US, the diplomatic mission may focus on improving or reinforcing its relationships with American institutions, defense institutions, perhaps bipartisan political figures, and it already has these ties established, but it will perhaps try to reinforce them even further. And they may also engage further with Congress, especially the Democrats, to emphasize the country's bilateral interests. And finally, I think building ties with non-American partners is going to be essential for Qatar to reduce reliance or over-reliance with the US, such as the European Union, East Asian counterparts such as China and Japan. And this way, Qatar can remain resilient or grounded in case any abrupt changes happen to its relationship with the US.
Thank you. Dr. Miller, let me turn to you. The GCC states have long navigated a delicate balance in their foreign policies, particularly in managing relationships with Iran, with Turkey, with the US, and with their regional neighbors. With China's growing presence and influence in the Gulf, how do you see the GCC in general, and maybe Qatar in particular, their past diplomatic experience in terms of navigating those relationships, shaping their current strategies, and what future direction do you anticipate their foreign policies moving in?
Okay, thank you. Let me just preface what I'm going to say because I think it's connected. We shouldn't confuse outcomes with the drivers. In other words, you shouldn't look at these actors and say they're successful, therefore they're not small. Really, the reality is this. When you're thinking about the smallness of these states, when you're thinking how influential they are, or whether what they call in the literature system effective, I would argue it's exactly because they're small. It's about their behavior and trying to explain their behavior. And there are more informed people in the audience, but let me put it this way. When Qatari decision makers decide to mediate in numerous conflicts around the wider region, it's precisely because they understand the vulnerabilities of smallness and they understand that the opportunities as this to build resilience. So that's the first point I want to make. Now, if you're looking at Qatar in particular, and then I'll go to the general, and very briefly, the key past experiences as far as I'm concerned for Qatar in terms of navigating this multi-complex and multipolar environment is the basing relationship with the US and the blockade. Because what they've shown between them is the importance, the value of having a long-term and smart strategic positioning. And here I would agree with the speaker who talked about hedging. I don't think hedging is a viable or valuable descriptor for what's going on here. It's about moving flexibly between different actors and about being able to be agile in your relationships and your decision-making rapidly. And I think that's a much better term than hedging in this particular environment. And so you have this value of long-term and smart strategic positioning. You also have a need for territorial agility, being able to move your resources outside of the Gulf to avoid vulnerabilities. So I think they're the two key diplomatic, political experiences of Qatar that have shaped and informed how they're going to deal with this uncertainty brought about by the multi-complex environment. And I don't have time to talk about it now, but the basing relationship with the US is fascinating and highly sophisticated form of smart strategic positioning that Qatar has engaged on over 2 decades now. Now, Patrick Porter, who's a strategic thinker, said that material capabilities do not bring primacy. They only allow you to pursue primacy. And I think that's the second lesson more generally for the Gulf in terms of their diplomatic experiences in the last 15 years. Interventions in the domestic affairs of other MENA countries, militarizing differences, coercion, have not been very viable. They've not been sustainable. They've increased vulnerability. They've damaged reputation. And so, as was said earlier, the premium now is on stability. The premium is on stability. But the problem is, in this multi-complex environment with China rising and the US becoming increasingly losing credibility and legitimacy, the US, their main ally and partner, is a source of instability, disorder, uncertainty. And so this is the context of the future Gulf policies vis-a-vis the China-US relationship in the region. What we're seeing and what we will see continuously, it's going to be harder and harder for local security managers to achieve what I would call a consensus with the US on critical security issues. At the same time as they can't achieve consensus on critical security issues, the US will remain at the center of the security doctrine of these Gulf states. And this is a significant challenge, right? Look, it's been said already, but I'll repeat it because it's super important. None of these actors have the capabilities or political will to provide for their own security, and no external actors do otherwise. It is very difficult to replicate the relationship that the US and these Gulf states have developed in the security sphere over 2 generations. So this is the first point. They're going to have to strategically position themselves highly smartly to overcome this contradiction. The US at the center of the security doctrines, at the same time as they cannot agree with the US on most critical security issues. The other thing they're going to do as a way to compensate for that is they're going to look to convert soft power resources into political and security outcomes. And here China will play a very big role because China's emphasis, as has been said, is on soft power. And the hope is that this leads to interdependence. And so in those terms, what you're going to see going forward is the rising importance, it's already happening, but even more, the rising importance of those sectors of the economy, like the maritime domain, like the port economies, that increasingly bind these countries to international and regional actors. And then the final point I would make is that when you're looking at the region now, when you're looking at the possible contribution that can be made by China, when you're looking at the instability that the United States is fostering to a greater or lesser extent, and I think it was touched on in the first panel when it was mentioned the OSCE, what you're going to see is these countries working together more in the interest of stability to try and build institutions that can help with arbitration of disputes, that can help manage conflict. Not solve them, but manage conflict between different parties. And I see a significant role there for China. Because in the absence of institutions that can allow, or these frameworks that can allow for multilateral collective cooperation, this uncertainty of a changing from a unipolar to multi-complex environment is just going to be deeply destabilizing. Thank you.
I think there's a little bit of optimism in that final bit of that answer, maybe. Let me end with you, Bilal. I mean, do you believe a new regional security order is emerging, and how might it influence power dynamics in the Gulf?
Order. I can't ignore that there are changes going on, obviously, in the regional security, but I think it's too soon to say that we have a new regional security order. I think a lot of it is a byproduct of what I told you before, which is this transition of the United States from a country that had dominance in the region and that sort of took matter with its own hands and used the military instrument preponderantly. Now it's more about partnership, which translates in the military domain, or regional security if you want, into a bit more of an integrative structure where, in the words of the late Ash Carter, a lot of these countries put more skin in the game, right? And so you saw an application of that, which was very real. It wasn't theoretical. During the tit-for-tat between Iran and Israel, or at least a couple of these countries actually played a security role that is very much consistent with what CENTCOM is trying to do, United States Central Command in the region, which is playing the role of a security integrator or facilitator. This is all, I mean, it's not new, but it's relatively new. We really were not pursuing such things in the past. And I think a lot of this was presented by the opportunity when we changed our unified command plan, when we integrated Israel into CENTCOM. It's sort of opened, the door for greater collaboration, perhaps even coordination between the Israelis and some of these Gulf Arabs. But no, I think it's too soon to say that we have a new regional security order. I very much agree with my friend here that the United States, despite it at least wanting to reduce its military involvement, is just such a crucial player in the region from a military point of view. And if it were to further trim its posture or to de-emphasize its involvement, I think it's going to have dramatic consequences for the security of the region. So it's still a major player. And I think what we're doing now is a very long-term project. Okay, this is not going to take a week or a year or even 5 years. It's a long-term project. We're trying to plug into what some of these countries are actually doing themselves, and I would very much commend what some of these countries are doing in terms of defense reforms. But it's hard. It's hard because of cultural differences, because of pace, tempo, us not really understanding very well how they do things. But that's the new regional security order that I see, which is much more of an integrated sort of coalition, at least, like-minded countries trying to fend off the Iranian threat, but obviously there's still plenty of gaps, plenty of challenges before you get into something really formal, really coordinated, that would be conducive to greater regional security.
Thank you. And I think that'll conclude the 2 rounds. So let's move to the audience questions. We have quite a number of them, and many of them directed at you, Dr. Ketbi. I'll put 2 of them together. One from, and I'll butcher this name because I can't very well read it, but Dr. Bemedapati of Virginia Tech. Dr. Ketbi, why can't the UAE and other Gulf Arab states put more pressure on the U.S. and Israel to stop the aggression on Gaza, Lebanon, and Yemen? They have strategic leverage through I2U2, IMEC, Abraham Accords. And then let me add to that question, what's the Gaza war's effects for the UAE-Israeli relationship? Does the cooperation between the UAE AI company, G42, and Microsoft mean the UAE has to turn to the US in the A1 field instead of China? Actually, that's the second question. So let's put just the first part, the Gaza war's effect on the US-Israeli relationship, and the previous question.
Well, it's easy. While this superpower, US, haven't got a leverage on Bibi, we have leverage. What do you think? Right. I mean, the superpower didn't have a leverage. How can we have leverage? No, Bibi has his own cause, and I've said it from before. He has his own cause. He will go war after war, if he is not immune, that he's not going to court or prison. So, and this is the problem where we are here. No, we are not going to get out from the Abrahamic Accord because it's not about Israel. It's about more project for the Middle East. Israel's part of it is bringing stability and prosperity and connectivity to this region. And of course, with Gaza war stopped everything. It shows how everything is connected. But also, the war is not, the world is not only depending on Israel. And if Israel has its own cause, that the world will not work. There are other alternatives, like UAE choose what they call a development route through Iraq and with Turkey. So also Israel has to fix itself, to fix its presidency, bringing a strategic leadership, thinking about the interest of his country rather than moving from wars to wars, seeking for security. You cannot bring security because you radicalize. Generations and generations are coming. They cannot forget that their father, their sister, their brothers, whoever dead in front of them. And also, like the Israeli traumatized by October 7th, and they cannot forget. So now nobody has interest in two-state solution. This is where we are. And nobody is going to have that, or even if United States wants, there is no appetite in Israel or between the Palestinian, that a road, which is right, this is the road for stability, but you need horses, and there is no horses between two camps. Now, look, I want also to add before the tag that yes, Gulfists, they went in their partnership, economic partnership with China, but it doesn't mean that they are pivoting from US. No, this is diversification for their economic partnership, not military or defense partnership, because still US is their security guarantor, which China cannot bring that. Still, China is a free rider for that security umbrella US is giving them. Now, also, when I'm talking about hedging, this is also applicable here. This is part of hedging that you move to US, you have to balance. You cannot, because also US administration raised their concern about using Chinese technology with American technology, especially in military, okay? So we came to balance that. Okay, we signed with Microsoft, we signed with NVIDIA and NVIDIA, and that's to balance that relation between two, but also US didn't say, you have to block China from your economy. It wasn't there, because even US, it has big trade is with China. But in terms of US, yes, we saw that here is more advanced, and the future is going, that US is going to bypass China in technology. So we moved that way.
Let me follow up on your first answer, actually, because I think it's very fair to say the U.S. is the superpower. It has the leverage. Why is it not using that leverage? Of course, we heard in the first panel and heard from the congressman earlier, the U.S., as a function of its own politics, is unable to use that leverage for various reasons. So there seems to be a seeking from other people to say, where are the other centers of leverage over Israel, and why isn't anybody using that? UAE, for example, doesn't have the same kind of political considerations that the United States has in terms of using that leverage. At the same time, you said that Israel needs to fix itself, but unless, as long as it has this type of impunity and this protection from the United States, it can't, look at itself and address those type of things. So there's kind of a cyclical problem here where nobody's using the leverage. Israel's running amok. Who's gonna stop it from doing so, or use any type of leverage that exists?
Yeah, because that's why we need also to fix the global order, right or not? You need to fix it. It's imbalance. There is double standards, okay, in that, and you see it with our region, with the other region, namely Ukraine, and we have seen that. Where is the leverage and where is the influence has been put? So this is also make the people in the region thinking that U.S. is biased. Look, I am from realpolitik school. I know it's about interest, okay? Yes, Israel serving interest for U.S., but also we serve the interest. The interest for U.S., if that region is always plagued with war and conflict, U.S. will never be able to leave the region, even if Trump wanted. Always coming to the region with different causes. China in the region, Russia in the region, wars in the region. So if we are looking, we have to fix the global order, the UN, okay? Because there are other powers now are coming. It's not only about the five, Africa, India. There are many, which is middle powers, but it can be a superpower also. So you have to change what we have since when? After the World War.
All right, let me put a question to the whole panel. This is from Paulette Lee, a retired international development communications officer and journalist. We haven't spoken here today of Oman. What is its role in GCC affairs and the future role in conflict involving Iran, given the Strait of Hormuz and shared borders, et cetera? Can anybody answer that question?
I can.
We have a lot of questions for you, so let's Bilal, Rory. No?
You got two people from the Gulf, so might as well hear from
You are a generalist, so you need to...
I can be very general, absolutely. All right, very quickly. The first thing I'd say about Oman in the context of its role in the wider GCC is that it's always been an outlier. The second point is that at the times that it prioritized and wanted to have collective security, the other countries did not. And then later on, at the time when other countries, primarily Saudi Arabia, wanted collective security, Oman did not. I don't think that you're going to see a huge difference under the current leader than you did under the first Sultan, Qaboos. But the important thing I'd say about Oman is, if you're talking in the context of Gaza, and if you're talking in the context of relations with Israel and the Abraham Declaration, or the Accords, I don't think that there is a huge, significant value in Oman put on bilateral formal relations with Israel. I think the pressure was coming extensively from the United States. And so really it was framed as, if you participate in this relationship, you can get a lot of technology and other benefits in kind. But I think there's a sense in Oman that ship has sailed, and it's probably possible to get those benefits from other actors. And the other interesting point I would say to you is that there's a huge assumption that China now is the #1 partner of Oman in the economic sphere. But actually, far bigger partners than China in the economic sphere for Oman now are Britain and the United States. Surprisingly much bigger in terms of trade, in terms of the value of trade and technology. And so, things have not changed that drastically in the context of Oman, even though it's been much more outspoken. And then I just say one other point. I spent a bit of time in Oman a few years ago working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and there's a certain frustration also among younger diplomats that it has a very unambitious foreign policy. Some might call it shrewd or very thoughtful, but there's a tendency to say, why can't we be more engaged? Why can't we be more active? And that's all I would say.
Thank you.
But Oman always neutral. This is its foreign policy, okay? Never taking and never change. But regarding Iran, because all GCC vulnerable towards Iran and its arsenal of arms. So how we approach in different way. Oman also, one of us, okay? Approach it through a neutral position towards Iran. Yes, we were trying to I would say counter Iran through United States, through Israel. We couldn't. So de-escalation is the best. Rapprochement is the best. Protecting our security. Qatar has a field with Iran. It has to protect that. We have 3 islands with Iran. We just mentioned it in any statements of GCC or that latest statement between UAE and US. But this is the reality in the Gulf. You have a power want to practice hegemony. You cannot avoid what they have. So it's the better way to de-escalate and rapproch. Might Iran see that is also, it will win in a win-win situation better than zero-sum formula.
Thank you. We have another question about how do you expect, this is for the panel or for Dr. Miller in particular, how do you expect ongoing Gulf energy transition efforts will impact mediation strategies and foreign policy directives of small states in the Gulf?
I'll answer very briefly to give others a chance if they want to contribute. What you're seeing, and this is again a very interesting phenomenon, is that one of the issues that the Gulf states, the energy producing Gulf states are really working together on, cooperating on, is shaping the narrative and selling the narrative of the importance of hydrocarbons in the energy transition to renewables. And you see this over the last 2 or 3 iterations of COP meetings. Energy ministers, senior officials explaining that hydrocarbons are not the problem, they are part of the solution. And so you're not going to see significant changes in that regard. Yes, of course, you're seeing increased investment in renewables, but that's relatively much smaller than increased investments in hydrocarbon because they understand that you cannot bring this fourth energy transition without using the resources and the capabilities of hydrocarbons to achieve it. And I'd say one other point that is something to be aware of. You're also seeing in some areas of renewables, hydrogen, solar, that these Gulf states are starting to compete with each other. To be the dominant regional actor in these areas. And the other point is, a lot of what the Gulf states are doing in terms of the energy transition is a response to the demands of their customers. It may not be financially viable, it may be very costly, it may not be their preference, but they want to engage with their customers in Europe, their customers in Asia, and they want renewable solutions. And so that's where you are now. But the key one is this driving this narrative globally forward that hydrocarbons are part of the solution, not part of the problem in the energy transition.
Thank you. Bilal, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I know we're wrapping up, and I want to say this before I leave. It has nothing to do with Oman. I think there's very little confidence in this room that things will dramatically change in U.S. foreign policy, even with the new administration. And I hate to say this because I have personal admiration for the commander-in-chief, but he's been a problem. And I say that because when his principals go into the Situation Room, they are primarily listeners. They don't really engage in a debate with him. He's been incredibly arrogant about what he knows about this conflict. And part of it, I understand, he comes with a ton of foreign policy experience back when he was at the Senate and then as he became president. But this knowledge has translated into arrogance where now his closest national security advisors really have very little to say in terms of swaying him, in terms of proposing ideas that might make things better for all of us. And so that's a big elephant in the room. President Biden has been a big problem in this entire problem set. And if there were to be a new commander-in-chief, there will be. Ironically, I say this, if it were to be President Harris, her lack of foreign policy experience is actually an asset, because this is when she will lean much more on I hope, a Bill Burns in Foggy Bottom or a Phil Gordon in the National Security Council. Both men I know, and obviously they have a ton of experience as well, but this lack of foreign policy experience on her part is not going to be a problem because, I mean, remember Reagan. Reagan had no foreign policy experience, turned out to be a pretty damn good president in foreign policy. And so the next couple of months, I can't wait for a new administration to come in because the commander-in-chief has not really played a helpful role in this entire situation. Forget his politics, forget his views about being a Zionist. I don't care about those things. I care about the fact that you bring in your closest advisors and actually listen to them as opposed to just do things exactly how you want them to be and pretend to be a know-it-all, to be honest. And I say that with utmost respect to the Commander-in-Chief.
Thank you. We still have a few more minutes. We have a ton of questions, so good on our very engaged audience. It's great to see. I'm going to try to lump in a few questions and craft one out of them for the group. I heard Hind mention earlier, maybe in passing, that the UAE and Saudi had an alignment with Trump in terms of its foreign policy vis-a-vis Iran. In the meantime, that foreign policy or relationship with Iran has changed quite dramatically between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Do you see, if Donald Trump is elected, tension in that relationship over the worldview of Iran and the Gulf states in terms of how they've had a rapprochement with Iran and they've been working with Iran over the past year to kind of prevent a regional spillover and regional war? Does that make sense?
Is it for me or?
Anybody can jump in.
I want to hear from Hind.
Well, I think it depends because we are in a completely different region right now. And each country in the region will have to play its cards very differently. I mean, we are on the verge of war. We're about to see a war actually like coming from Iran towards Israel. I mean, like only recently, a few days ago, the US has stationed its military personnel in Israel to shield against any potential like Iran attack, etc. So for Gulf countries, it's a very, very difficult and tense situation, and it's mainly speaking for Qatar, because again, Qatar hosts the military base. It hosts the biggest air base, the American air base in the country. And to be honest with you, hosting an air base for the US in the country makes it a legitimate target. So in this regard, at least, there is a lot to worry about. Qatar will have to approach Iran a bit more practically than it had in the past, just because it's very concerned, it's at very high alarm about its own national security interest. Now, the way the UAE and Saudi Arabia will approach this might be maybe in disregard of Qatar's own national security interests. I'm not sure to be exact.
But certainly they face the same threat, all right? In fact, if they had never had that rapprochement over a year ago, October 7th might look quite different for the Gulf and for the region in terms of the tension between Iran and, let's say the UAE and potentially Saudi Arabia in terms of the relationship with the United States and Israel. I think having that rapprochement in place allowed them to kind of diffuse the situation, speak directly to Iran, and prevent a regional spillover. If Trump
No, look, Iran warned that if you let Israel use your sky, okay, we are going to retaliate against you. And Iran did not use when they hit Israel. So I don't think we will let Israel to use that. Israel might retaliate from different points, which it has. Where it has in Azerbaijan, it has Kurdistan. That it might use also from its base in Ethiopia. Okay, it can. Israel can. But I don't think also not Israel, not US will allow. Okay, Israel to put us in that situation. And that was Iraq jihads coming to the region. What for? To deliver this message, to warn us. And I think all of us wise enough that not to threaten our security, our lands to that. We are out of that game between Iran and but I think the Israeli is going to do it. I don't know when they will do it. Here that I claim now where we are, I think this is their opportunity because they don't know. I don't think Bibi wants Kamala to win. And he's also not sure if Trump will agree. Trump, at the end of the day, is a businessman. He wants deals. I think even if he came, he will find a deal with Iran. He's a guy of the deals. So I'm not looking at it that Trump's looking for his own interests, jobs, and money. He sucked the Gulfists before, and he's going to suck them now. And that's it always with the Trump.
We'll end on that beautiful euphemism right there. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our